Hello, friends, and welcome to Mousterpiece Melodies, a podcast that's listening to the songs of Disney movies past and present. I'm Josh Spiegel.
And I'm Scott Renshaw. Thanks for joining us on this comprehensive and encyclopedic compendium of all things Disney music. Now playing in Mousterpiece Melodies, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Before we get into our discussion, thank you for listening. No matter how you're checking us out, we hope you like what you're hearing. And if you are, we'd appreciate it if you could rate and review Mousterpiece Melodies on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcatching app you're using to listen to us.
That's right. Let everyone know how much you love the show and tell your friends to do the same. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Scott Renshaw and read my film criticism at cityweekly.net.
And you can follow me on Blue Sky at Mousterpiece and email me at mousterpiececinema@gmail.com with any comments, questions, or opinions you'd like to share. Now, before we get into our discussion of the songs of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, I wanted to quickly set the table here for anyone who is listening out there. Make sure you all understand what this show is, how it came to be very quickly. By the way, I kind of assume that I can lump our listenership right now into two different groups. Scott, I feel like there's the people who might know us from, as you mentioned, your work at cityweekly.net. Maybe they've followed you on Blue Sky or previously on Twitter. In my case, maybe you know me from those Disney brackets I did back in the halcyon days of COVID-19 on Twitter.
And the halcyon days of another social media app.
I was going to say, we're almost 5 years to the day of the most popular thing I ever tweeted, Scott. And I feel like I don't know why it's in my head recently, but I posted two screenshots of a guy, I forget his name, I feel like he owns Twitter now, talking about, in one tweet it was him saying the coronavirus panic is dumb, and the other one was him saying, free America now, and my caption was, look at this asshole. And boy, 5 years ago version of me, you didn't know how right you were, pal.
Were we ever so young and innocent?
I don't know, but no, the point is, so people may know us from that, or there's the other group of people who might remember that there was once a time when Scott and I co-hosted another podcast called Mousterpiece Cinema. That's a podcast that I started back in the summer of 2011. And I had a couple of different co-hosts, including yourself, Scott. We ran that show, nearly 450 episodes, including regular and bonus shows. Each episode focused on a different film from the Walt Disney Company filmography. As I mentioned, I started that by myself in 2011 with Cars 2. Our last episode was at the end of 2019 about the rise of Skywalker. As you all know, we start strong and we end strong.
We can only hope to continue in that tradition.
Exactly. And, for a number of reasons, I chose to wrap things up with Mousterpiece Cinema. I was about to have a second child. I also remember looking at the list of 2020 releases from Disney and thinking, well, that will be work to discuss movies like Artemis Fowl. Do we all remember Artemis Fowl? I hope you do. The point being, I chose to wrap that up. And obviously, in the last 5 years, nothing of note has happened personally, professionally, or globally. And don't fact check me on that one, by the way. Anyway, a few months ago, I was, over the holidays, I was, not to brag, I was reading an article in the New Yorker. That's right, I was using my one free article of the month. And I was reading a profile of the actor Adam Scott, who people may know as one of the stars of the Apple TV show Severance. It was a big profile about his career. He's also been on Party Down, Parks and Recreation, Step Brothers, etc. And, talking about his career and that show as it returned for its second season earlier this year. And it also mentioned, almost in like a footnote, that he and the comedian Scott and Scott, have hosted shows like You Talking You Two to Me, and they've done other podcasts about musical groups like the Talking Heads. They did one about Bruce Springsteen, and it also mentioned that they were going to be doing one about Billy Joel, who is unironically one of my favorite musical artists of all time, and I got really excited. And by the way, I should note, I read that article like right around New Year's Day, and it's March 19th when we're recording this episode. I'm still waiting on that Billy Joel podcast from Scott and Scott. I'm sure they're dedicated listeners, and immediately, guys, I would love for that show to be in my ear holes right now.
Can you have dedicated listeners when you haven't actually done an episode yet?
but this is the first one. I know that, even though they don't know who I am and they're very famous, I'm sure they're prepared to be guests on an eventual episode of this show. No,
naturally,
of course. But anyway, I saw that, I got very excited, and I started re-listening to old episodes of You Talking You Two to Me, which, if you used to listen to the old show, as I'm going to refer to it, I'm sure many times over the course of this podcast, I referenced You Talking You Two to Me a lot. I thought it was a very funny show. I was re-listening to the old episodes, and at the ends of each episode, they actually talk about the band. As Scott alluded to with this podcast, You Talking You Two to Me was the comprehensive and encyclopedic compendium of all things U2. They covered important details like band member names. And when guests were on, they would ask questions like, when did you first hear of U2? And it was very, very funny, in my opinion. And they would always eventually get past the silliness and talk about different songs from different albums of these groups. And as I was listening to these episodes, I thought, somebody ought to do a show like that about Disney songs. And then about 3 seconds later, I thought, I think I just thought of a new idea for a podcast I want to do. And then I reached out on Blue Sky. I mentioned people. I was like, I don't really want to do a show by myself. And who should reach out online but my old friend Scott? Not those guys. Scott, you, of course, reached out. You're like, hey, bro, right here. It was word for word what you said. And here we are now.
I think it may have been, in fact, a hem.
I think it was. Yes, exactly. So so that's how the show kind of came into being. In terms of what you, the listener, can expect, a couple of brief notes. One, there are not going to be as many movies that we talk about on this show. The idea is that we are going to focus on different films from the Walt Disney Company filmography that have, we'll say, unique or dedicated songs created to them. I think the counterexample in terms of movies that would not qualify, a movie that I know both Scott and I love very dearly, is The Rocketeer, a film that has never gotten old for me. I love it very much. And it has songs inside, there are songs in the film. Listeners who may not have seen that film recently may not realize that Jan Levinson from The Office, Laura Hardin, shows up very young in her career. She sings Begin to Begin at a nightclub. A great song, a great old standard, obviously not a song created for The Rocketeer. And that's the case for any songs in that film. They're not unique to that movie. Or something like The Royal Tenenbaums, a film that I know has recently been discussed because of the very tragic passing of Gene Hackman. Wonderful film, one of my favorites of all time, a movie that is wall to wall with songs, tons of songs in The Royal Tenenbaums, like Nico's These Days, Van Morrison's Everyone, but songs that, of course, way predate The Royal Tenenbaums. So as much as I love that film, it wouldn't count. We're going to focus on movies that have, in many cases, we'd say original songs, but not always. One film that I know I've tagged that we will likely discuss in a future episode is the musical adaptation of Into the Woods that Disney released in 2014. Obviously, a big musical. Those songs technically existed before the film was released, but it is obviously a musical movie. So there's always going to be a little bit of wiggle room. If you listen to the old show, you know that I try to find ways to sneak things in as much as I can. But for now, we focus on songs, like original songs in specific films. That's number one. Two, we will not be releasing episodes once a week. This show, because there are not as many films, I'd say once every 2 weeks. This episode, as long as everything with Podbean, the site we're using to host this show, has gone well. This episode's going up on March 24th. You can expect the next episode 2 weeks from then, and so on and so on. And aside from that, I think the only other question that people might be wondering, I think, is actually a nice transition into our discussion of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Obviously, this episode is being released the Monday after the newest Disney remake, a film called Snow White, directed by Mark Webb and starring Rachel Zegler. So you might be thinking to yourself, Josh, are you going to do separate episodes about the remakes of Disney movies that have songs in them? Absolutely not. And in case you're wondering why not, I don't want to. That's pretty much it. I don't want to talk about these movies separately, and certainly in a case like Snow White, I don't know that I'd want to watch it a second time, but we'll save that for later. The point being, this episode, is going to cover the songs of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and also the songs of Snow White. But let's start with the songs of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the 1937 film that, as the PR rep at my screening last night mentioned in her intro, started it all for Disney, at least in terms of their feature films. This is the first English language animated feature film, Disney's first animated feature, first feature-length film, period, the adaptation of the classic Brothers Grimm fairy tale, and it has a number of songs in it. So I do want to kind of start the conversation on that film and its song, Scott, with a less ironic version of a question I alluded to earlier. You and I, you're a little older than I am, but neither of us was around when this film premiered at the Carthay Circle Theater in Hollywood, California in December of 1937, or when it was playing around the country in 1938. So when did you first get introduced to the songs of Snow White and or the film overall?
I believe, and I think this was the same qualification I made when on the old show when we talked about Snow White, was during one of its theatrical re-releases. Those of you who are of a certain age will remember that that was what Disney did before there was such a thing as Disney Plus, or even before there was such a thing as home video, is re-release their classic films usually every 7 years. I didn't actually look it up. I think the re-release in question that I would have seen would have been sometime around 1983 or 1984. And it's entirely possible there was an earlier incarnation that I saw as a younger. I was already a teenager at that point, so I don't know whether I would have seen something in the 70s when it was during re-release. But I do remember watching it because that was around the time that I was actually working in a movie theater in my hometown of Bakersfield, California, and said, sure, why not? Let's just watch all these things when they're available, because you just never know. And then suddenly they were going to be available in their limited time only clamshell VHS, incarnations. So, that was just sort of this is a famous movie. You watch famous movies when you get a chance, especially when they're in a theater.
So, I mean, with that in mind, were there any, you might have heard then some of the songs before you saw the film in a theater. I mean,
sure.
Right? Were there any that really stood out to you before you saw it in full?
Well, I mean, certainly things were familiar from having been someone who grew up in Southern California and went to Disneyland. There were the songs that were part of the Snow White attraction. You would hear Hi Ho, and you would hear, you would go to the well and hear the little bits of I'm Wishing. And, so things like that were sort of part of the Disney world. There wasn't, again, for those of you who are younger and don't remember, it wasn't possible to just go on Spotify and listen to a Disney song. It had to appear kind of organically in some other fashion. Now, I again, on the old show, I mentioned frequently that when I was growing up, we had the vinyl LP versions of several of the Disney films. It was the full dialogue, every bit of sound effects of these movies, of 101 Dalmatians, the Aristocats, Robin Hood, and that was how I got to know these things. I don't think we have the equivalent for Snow White, so I can't say that there was any other kind of recording that I might have heard them from, but I was probably more familiar with the ones that were the parts of the Disney attractions. Again, you'd hear Hi Ho, and you'd hear maybe Whistle While You Work, but probably nothing too much beyond that.
Fair enough. Now, I mean, with all that in mind, when you think about these songs specifically, it is well known that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is often considered, AFI, the American Film Institute, called it the best animated film ever made. I want to say that Someday My Prince Will Come, I believe, is rated as the 19th greatest song in film history by the same, yes, it's the 19th greatest film song in their 100 Years, 100 Songs. So this is a film that has that kind of imprimatur from when you were born, essentially, of like Snow White is one of the pinnacles. So for you, with listening to these songs again, or in your history of just like, has this always been something where those songs really stood out to you? Are any of these your go-tos? Your big, I gotta listen to this. This is gonna pep me up, put me in a good mood, or please God, turn this off right now.
I would say somewhere squarely between those two things. I mean, we will get into obviously individual songs in more detail, but there are two things that are I think the most significant overall factor as I was rewatching the film and listening to with the focus on listening to the songs. One is I do not like Adriana Casalati's voice at all, and that matters a lot when she's doing most of the singing. So that certainly affected my perspective on the songs as they appeared in the movie. The other thing is there's a lot of great music in this movie, but I don't know that translates to them being great songs. There is the versions of these songs in this movie are very long, but the amount of them that actually involves anyone singing is very limited. There are very few lyrics. And one of the things, as we will talk about the new version of Snow White, when you realize, well, Hi Ho suddenly has like 12 more verses, that there just isn't a lot of actual singing going on in these. But the music really sets the tone, and the music is wonderful in the way that it plays out. So I guess it's an interesting thing to think about. What do you consider, quote unquote, the song? What is the song of Hi Ho? Is it everything that surrounds it that includes, stuff that's just where the the music is playing but no one is singing, and same for all of these things. So I think there is some wonderful music, but for me, I think about songs in a different context, and perhaps that has to do with the Disney movies that were part of my childhood and younger adult years, growing up thinking about the Ashman Menken that was a show tune. These are not and never were meant to be show tunes, and I think about them very differently in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I am younger than you are. I just turned 40 last September, which is a fun sentence to say and not feel old. And
you do not get to do that with this
with you. I know.
With this elder Xer.
That's fair. I know. I was just a couple nights ago being like, I'm an elder millennial because I know the lyrics to "Where in the World Was Carmen Sandiego" like the back of my hand. And there were a few people who were like, I know that, and I'm an Xer, and I'm like, okay, good for you. But anyway,
probably because they were babysitting elder millennials.
Probably they were. Yes, that's a very reasonable possibility. No, so obviously, I had a slightly different experience in terms of my initial awareness of the songs of Snow White. I have two specific kind of memories in my head. One would have been fall of 1992. I was 8 years old. I was a little boy who wanted to be a big boy. And I remember going to the mall one weekend with my dad to the Walden Galleria in Western New York. They had a Disney store there because I feel like for the fifth time in the last 10 minutes, one of us is going to say, for those of you who are too young to remember, there used to be in-person Disney stores, not just a little section in your local Target. And at the Disney store at that time, they had Disney, among many things, has a habit of releasing or creating new compilation sets of its music. And, you never forget your first. And in my case, our first was The Music of Disney, A Legacy in Song, a 3-disc collection of songs that encompassed everything from Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf from the Three Little Pigs short in 1934, all the way to the songs of Beauty and the Beast. Although this was released in 1992, it was released before Aladdin came out that November. So in this 3-disc set, my dad was nice enough to splurge on it, and I remember my mom being not 100% thrilled that my dad had splurged on this set, because at that time a 3-disc set was a big deal.
Yeah.
Now I don't think it really would be. But the other part of it that I remember about listening to the CDs, anytime we were in the car or if I had it on at home and a Snow White song, there were, if I recall correctly, 3 songs from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on this set: Hi Ho, Whistle While You Work, and Someday My Prince Will Come. Mm-hmm. And 2 of those 3 feature Adriana Casalati, who I'm sure was a wonderful person. And I say that because I feel almost a little bad that now I am going to echo through my mother very similar opinion to what you said, which is anytime one of these songs came on and my mom was either in the room or if we were driving somewhere, she would roll her eyes or like make a gagging face or mock the very distinctive, high-pitched, pinched almost soprano quality of Adriana Caselotti, who was a very, a young, clearly very distinctive vocal quality, a very distinctive style to her singing approach that obviously was captivating enough for Walt Disney to cast her in the role of Snow White. But I think the flip side is kind of jumping off what Scott said. You really have to vibe with her voice to be on board with the way she sings songs like Whistle While You Work or Someday My Prince Will Come, because if you don't, it's, I mean, as you said, there's not a ton of lyrics, but her voice is a huge part of these songs, because that's the other thing. I don't think I would have remembered even when I was also 8, but the summer of 93, that's the last time that Snow White was re-released in the theaters. And that's, I don't have a great memory of it, but I am sure I saw the film in theaters at that time. Even though there may not be a ton of lyrics, there are quite a lot of songs in this movie. It's an 83-minute film, including the credits, and there are, not counting reprises, there are 8 songs in this film, 8 original songs. The aforementioned ones, like Someday My Prince Will Come. There's also the Silly Song, which is the yodeling song for people who may not know that name off the top of their heads. With a Smile and a Song. Then there's I'm Wishing, in one song. There's quite a lot of songs here, and it pretty much relies on either Adriana Caselotti or the chorus of dwarves, the actors who play Bashful, Doc, Dopey, Happy, Sneezy, Sleepy, and oh my goodness, I forgot the last one. I only can do 6 of them at a time. I can't even do them in alphabetical order, Scott.
I'm trying to remember. Is it Bashful that you missed? I
thought I said Bashful. Maybe I didn't. Well,
because I can always get you. Everyone can always get the 5 Ys. It's the 2 non-Ys. It's the Doc and Bashful that catch people mostly.
Yep. Well, either way, we'll never know. None of us will ever. You, the listener, will never be able to go back and figure out which one I missed. Unfortunately, that's just not how podcasts work anymore. Okay, my point being, it's really interesting how many songs there are. One thing that I think broadly that I almost had forgotten, even though it's undeniably the case from when the film was released, the one character who doesn't sing that really surprises me is the evil queen herself. Lucille Laverne, who voices the character, this was her last film role before she passed away in 1942. She doesn't have a song. There is no villain song in this film. Obviously, especially in the Renaissance era of the late 80s and 1990s, villain songs like Poor Unfortunate Souls or Be Prepared are a huge part of the musical experience of these films. There is no villain song in this movie. And I think it partially ties into one of the things you said earlier, Scott, which is these are not show tunes, partly because they're not just not intended to be show tunes. This film was released, 8 or 9 years before Oklahoma was first put on Broadway, which really helped establish the concept of the Broadway musical that effectively blends story and song as a full experience as opposed to something more vaudevillian. So it's really interesting, though, that she does not have a song here. And as we'll talk about later, that is a problem that has been rectified, though to what extent, that'll be up for debate later. In the new movie, I mean. Anyway, so let's talk about this then song by song. As I said, there are 8 original songs here. There are 3 reprises. Hi-Ho, one song, and Someday My Prince Will Come. Each get a brief reprise by the end. None of them are terribly long. I think we can go one by one here. We don't need to jump around. And in doing so, we can really talk about the first 2 songs together, because while I'm Wishing and one song are technically separate tracks, one performed by Adriana Caselotti, the other performed by Dean Stockwell's dad, Harry Stockwell, who, if you're out there, you don't know Dean Stockwell from Blue Velvet, from Quantum Leap, from lots of other stuff. His dad is the prince in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. They're technically 2 tracks, but they kind of go hand in hand. They're pretty much the same song bundled into one. So let's talk about I'm Wishing, if not one song, because obviously the concept of a wish is pretty fundamental to Disney animation. And even though I'm Wishing is not the theme song of the Walt Disney Company like When You Wish Upon a Star is, I'm Wishing is the very first song in a Disney feature, and it includes in the very title the concept of wishing. So, I mean, if we separate from ourselves the knowledge that Adriana Caselotti's voice is a lot, we'll say, what's your take on I'm Wishing?
I think And again, we're going to probably be touching on ideas that, your one's conception of what a Disney musical or what music in a Disney film is can be shaped a lot by
Mm,
where the era in which you grew up. But I think that I'm wishing plays a lot less interestingly when you realize that it serves the same narrative function, the I Want song, as Someday My Prince Will Come. And
mm,
again, I think of the I Want song because that's sort of the terminology that Howard Ashman used when he was talking about the kind of the paradigms for for the Disney musical and the showstopper and the I Want song and the all those kinds of things, and that you know I'm wishing is an I Want song that very shortly leads into another I Want song. So it realizes when you listen to it by itself, it's like, okay, we're getting an I Want song. And then you realize, oh, that's not even as good an I Want song as we get 10 minutes hence. So it's just it's so limited in its functionality that it just seems like I'm not quite sure what it's doing other than
mm.
this little silly little echo, thing that it does with the well.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned "Someday My Prince Will Come" because again, I've watched this film a number of times. Focusing on it now, as you noted, kind of focusing much more on the songs. I think it's interesting that you could argue really all of the songs that Snow White sings, well, three of the songs she sings, are I Want style songs. And Someday My Prince Will Come comes a lot later than I would have expected. I would say it arrives in the film in the back half, which is really quite odd in terms of its placement when you think
Mm,
about the function that it is serving. The song that I have always thought is the most underrated in this film is the other I Want style song, which is With a Smile and a
hmm
Song, because I
hmm
haven't said that word enough times in the last 10 seconds. My point being that, like, that also functions in a similar capacity. I think I'm wishing is definitely a very slight opener. It feels as much almost as a proof of concept of
uh,
what
mm,
Disney animation could look like on the big screen in terms of there's the playfulness of the sound design having that echoing with the wishing well and then leading into an actual kickstart of the story of look there's a guy and I don't know what his name is but boy he sure is pretty and he's singing about how pretty I am. I feel like the prettiest girl at the ball. I'm wishing like it's a song that I probably hadn't given much thought to until I began dating my wife back in the early 2000s because she liked the combination of songs and she also enjoyed making fun of Harry Stockwell's voice as it kind of goes in that lower timbre with one song only for you, like the way that he sings that. It was an easy way for us to kind of playfully tease each other. But I know we're going to talk more in depth about Someday My Prince Will Come in a few minutes. One of the takeaways I had watching the film this time was a the first 25 minutes of this movie, with the exception of the evil queen scenes, I'd forgotten are almost all sung through in a way. There's so little, not just that there's maybe not a lot of lyrics in these songs, there's not a ton of dialogue
hmm
in the first 25 or so minutes of the film, up to and including Hi Ho. There's a lot more musical sequencing, a lot of, driven very heavily by the score composed by Frank Churchill. And I was really struck by that. And then I was also struck by, I thought Someday My Prince Will Come arrives a lot sooner
mm,
in the story, but instead we get this kind of, sort of, not really duet to start us off. We have kind of a call and response between not just Snow White and her wishing well, but Snow White and her prince with I'm Wishing and One Song. So, as I said, though, With a Smile and a Song, which comes third, that is a song that I have always felt was very underrated. I think is a really, really charming song. Really like sweet and in a way that it feels like it kind of portends songs like a dream is a wish your heart makes in Cinderella, or honestly even this time listening to it I was thinking about the arrangement of certain songs like something from Mary Poppins, something like Stay
mm.
Awake, or Feed the Birds. That's a little too downbeat, but you know what I mean. Like I feel like there's a hidden kind of maybe not somber quality to it, but one of the covers of that song that's particularly notable, which we'll discuss here in a little bit, I feel like taps into a little bit more of a lower key version of the same lyrics. I particularly like that song, and I almost wish that it got more love over time.
It is nice to rediscover, and I think that that will probably be, I hope, be true as we go forward. Is that some of the deeper cuts will yield interesting results just in realizing, oh, we probably didn't give this one enough attention. I did want to actually back up real quick to one song, just because I was interested in the way that you referred to it as the call and response
Mm,
with I'm Wishing, and that I think is one of the things that it becomes easy to think about with a lot of hindsight about how thinly developed characters were, and that it's when call and response, they might as well never even exist in the same frame. That they're just, I'm singing my song, I'm singing my song, oh, I guess we love each other now. And that's sort of a way to think about things that we just would not accept anymore. Now again, as we talk about the new film, we can discuss whether filling out that backstory works or not, but it is just having, there isn't a love song. There are two people singing songs, and they kind of theoretically go together in some way. It's just it's interesting to think about that. You having to paste them together to create a love song, a single love song.
that's true. Yeah, that's a very fair point. But what do you think about With a Smile on a Song?
But yes, but again, just rediscovering something that's like, as I said, when I think about the songs that I knew from long before, I also had the Legacy and Song, collection, but that was something that I obviously had much later, and the songs I knew from either, you going to the Disneyland attraction, or just because they were sort of in the popular culture so much. And then you find something like this and you think, oh, there's one that actually I think deserves a little more attention. It's not one of those three. You mentioned the three that were on the Legacy and Song, and obviously you have to make cuts somewhere when you're creating a collection like that. But it's like, yeah, I think it deserved a little more attention.
Yeah. Again, it's I think in some way. I mean, I know when we talked about Snow White on the old show, I'm sure I said something to the effect that I think more reviewers are going to come around to this now. Snow White is a very important film. It is undeniably a very influential film. But just because it's first doesn't mean it's best. And certainly, I'm not going to say that With a Smile and a Song is kind of the peak of this style of song, but I think it is. I think that it does, like, generally speaking, it is better than people may give it credit for. Partly because they may not, to the point, they may not realize that that song is from this movie, or it may just kind of slip by in a way. But that song aside, and that song comes after Snow White has survived her perilous trek through the forest. And then after that, she, of course, arrives at the dwarves' house before she knows that they are anything but seven little men, as she calls them at one point. She then, but before they arrive back home, she has found that this strange house that she's discovered is very messy, so she'd like to clean it up. And that, of course, leads to her communing with lots of animals and singing Whistle While You Work. I will say, by the way, it took me until literally last night watching other characters whistling a lot and thinking about, of all things, I was thinking about that 2011 Muppets movie. I was like, I guess there was plenty of background of why a character in a Disney movie would have to whistle in a really key moment before Walter did that in the Muppets. I don't know why I've managed to forget that with Whistle While You Work, which is, Whistle While You Work is the kind of song, it's made fun of in the 2007 film Enchanted when Amy Adams' character Giselle is cleaning up the apartment she's in New York City. But you could also argue that Whistle While You Work, I mentioned Mary Poppins before, I feel like a spoonful of sugar follows in the
Hmm.
footsteps of a song like Whistle While You Work, where
Absolutely.
characters don't want to do some tedious task, but there's a way to make it fun. And it's a case where, again, Adriana Castellotti's voice is not charming, but also, honest to God, I've been whistling the tune to this song for a good chunk of the day. I think it speaks as much to what you were saying before about how Frank Churchill's score, how the score not only of these songs, because to be fair, there is the musical score separate of the songs that was composed by two other men. Paul J. Smith, and I want to make sure I get the name right. Paul Smith, at least, is one of the two.
Hmm.
The point being, the music of Whistle While You Work, I think, is really well done. It is, very chipper. I will say it goes on a little long for my tastes. I think again, it kind of speaks to what you were saying before about there may not be a ton of lyrics, but the musical sequence, the song sequence, kind of extends itself a little bit more. I also think not just that Castellotti's voice is a little grating, she has understandably, such a prim and proper tone to to the way she characterizes Snow
Mm-hmm.
White. But Whistle While You Work, especially in the way that it is visualized while you're hearing the song, is as much about the gags with the different animals struggling to clean up the dwarf's
Mm-hmm.
house and how they kind of get in their own little scrapes. She, I think, kind of runs up against the humor. It kind of feels like they're clashing a little bit. I mentioned call and response for I'm Wishing in one song. This feels more like a push and pull between it's supposed to be funny and yes, but I'm Snow White and I'm not going to impersonate her on this. I don't want to hurt anybody's eardrums. But you know what I mean? Like I
Or
think
hurt
there's
yourself.
yes, exactly. There's an interesting little imbalance, I think, in the song where the music of it is undeniably catchy. It is an earworm for a reason, but I think it extends itself a little more than it needs to.
But I think nobody would miss it if you removed Snow White from that scene entirely and had the animals cleaning up while the music played in the background. Would anything really be lost from that scene? I mean,
Mm,
I'm genuinely saying I think that everything that is memorable about that comes from the music and from the cute little animals doing their cute little animal things. And of course, it's funny you're mentioning, of course, the reference in Enchanted to the
mm,
to the Happy Working song, and just the idea that I was watching this with a lens of Enchanted throughout the entire thing, not just the songs that were sort of direct parallels, but just the way that Snow White holds her hands, and that becoming the way that Giselle holds her hands, and so a
mm.
lot of this feels like it has. I don't know if that becomes sort of the the walk hard to the to the equivalent of the musical biopic that this is, but it does feel that with that as its kind of you know direct follower, that some parts of this feel a little bit sillier or a little bit
Mm,
more, and that includes some of that, like the straight faced version of the animals cleaning up doesn't really play as entertainingly as it does with the self aware princess. Or I
mm.
mean, of course, within the movie, she's not self aware. We are aware of the tropes of the princess, but I think that affects the way that we think about it now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point. I'll be very curious when we eventually revisit that kind of idea with Cinderella, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or Sleeping Beauty, because certainly those two films feel very much like let's do Snow White, but a little differently. Let's expand on these ideas. Let's make them, really pop. But yeah, I hadn't thought about kind of the way she's visualized, but within the song, but that's a really good call out. And again, I think that the music of Whistle While You Work is again very charming. The lyrics are a little. It's a song where I think not even take Snow White out of it as much as you. It's not a long movie. You can take it back a few seconds, like take a couple of those gags out, but you wouldn't miss too much. I don't think. Now, the next big song, since I should note, "Whistle While You Work" is a song we will talk about again later, not just in our little cover corner, which you'll all find out about soon, but also in discussing the new movie and also in discussing who you take out or put in that sequence. Because, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the new movie, the new song, it is not Snow White and animals cleaning by themselves. There might be some other characters involved too, but I'll leave you all in suspense for now. The next song, which also shows up in the new movie, is Hi Ho, which again, another classic, another song that we've all heard a million times before. And also, it's funny. I was noting this to myself. I always kind of forget. It's basically two songs in one because the first section of the song has a different tempo, it has a different rhythm. It is
Mm-hmm.
much more about the dwarves saying, we work in the mine all day long. We don't even know why we're doing it, but we're doing it. And then it shifts into the more familiar hi ho, the repetition of that phrase. And it's a really charming song. I think, again, because it feels a little bit like two songs in one, it goes a little longer than I always remember. Although it is worth noting, there are actually a number of lyrics that were cut from Hi Ho originally. As I understand it, a few of those lyrics have reared their ugly head and shown up in the new song. Although I think there are also some other new lyrics from
Oh yes.
Pasek and Paul. Oh yes, but we'll talk about the new version later. What is your take on, again, what is arguably one of the biggest songs that this film produced?
I would go out on a limb to say that I think Hi Ho, the second portion that you say, and I will talk about what I think is interesting about the kind of the juxtaposition of those two parts. I think Hi Ho is the earwormiest of the
Mm,
golden age Disney songs. Now
wow.
we'll go into the what that means, and I think that that's that I'm not saying it's the best, but I think part of what you were saying about having Whistle While You Work in your head, Hi Ho has been in my head all day after seeing Snow White yesterday, and I think that that's just that little march. It's just that way that it sort of doom doom doom. I mean, it's kind of like the Mickey Mouse Club theme. It's got that sort of like that bounciness to it that's just going to kind of stick with you. But it is kind of interesting to me that introductory section, the "we dig dig dig" part, does feel it's kind of dark, and I mean that in the sense that it's like, yes, they are doing this drudge work, and then
Mm.
the hi ho comes when it's like, it seems like the hi ho should be coming from when they're leaving work, but it's off to work they go, and it's they're that's like, oh, we have to work in a mine, and we have to work in a mine, but okay, hey, it's all right. It's like they're trying to convince themselves. So it's I don't know. There's something that's kind of interesting about placing those two things in contrast. That it's like that's even the keys are a little bit, it's
Mm.
sort of there's some minor key stuff going on in that first part, and then it goes into, hey, but it's it's a drudgery, but it's our life, it's
Hey, when you've been doing it for nearly 300 years, you might as well be a little downbeat. What am I talking about? That
I
does. I might be teasing something about the new movie.
you
Anyway,
might be.
yeah, I might. But anyway, yes. I mean, it. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, not. I don't always think about kind of the details of the lyrics to the point of the drudgery of it, but it obviously is. I think the part that I've always thought about that has always made my head, like, scratch my head, is it's like you don't even know why you're in the mine, and it's like, who's your boss? Why are you doing it if you don't have to? And obviously, the answer to that question is you shouldn't be thinking about that, which really we shouldn't be, because it's like, well, the movie's not going to answer that question for you. The songs certainly are not going to answer those questions, but it's a fair point. And so I want to go back to something you said. So when we say Golden Age, we are talking about the first five feature films from Disney. This one, Fantasia, Bambi, Dumbo, Pinocchio, right?
Yes.
And so you're saying among songs like "When You Wish Upon a Star," "Baby Mine," I can can I see see an elephant fly? This is the earwormiest of them for you. Okay.
Yes, but what's interesting about, and I will be looking forward to talking about all of those as we progress, but many, if not most, of the other most memorable songs from those movies are ballads.
Mm,
And it's not that I don't think a ballad can be an earworm, but for me, the songs that tend to stick are the up-tempo ones. So,
mm,
Love is a Song, lovely song, but is it an earworm? Not for me. The same thing for, obviously, When You Wish Upon a Star is iconic within the Disney canon, and basically the theme song for the entire company. Is it an earworm in the same way? I mean, for someone, I'm sure it's going to be, but I tend to gravitate towards those that have a little more pep in their step.
mm. That's fair. And I mean, I think that's why I wanted to call out, When I See an Elephant Fly, which, questionable content aside, is definitely very upbeat, and certainly
Sure.
much more so than Baby Mine. But yeah, it's an interesting point, and I think the reason why I mentioned Whistle While You Work is arguably that and Hi Ho each have a much bouncier quality, and Whistle While You Work really doesn't. I think it's funny, they're both about the drudgery of working away, but Whistle While You Work does not have lyrics that kind of highlight the drudgery of it in quite the
Sure.
same way, I would say. And by the way, I want to note something here that I thought was absolutely wild. I'm sure you're aware of, but our listeners may not. Now, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was nominated for its score in 1937. It was Frank Churchill, Lee Harline, and Paul Smith were nominated, and it lost. It was one of, I'm looking right now, one of, I think, oh my goodness, it might be like 15 different nominees in 1937, also including Lost Horizon, The Life of Emile Zola, The Prisoner of Zenda, and the winner. Do you know the winner of the Best Original Score in 1937 at the Oscars, Scott?
I do not.
I was going to say, if you knew this movie, my mind would have been blown. I've never heard of it before. It's called 100 Men and a Girl. It stars Deanna Durbin and the maestro Leopold Stokowski, as well as Adolf Menchu. I'm sure it's a very nice movie. It won Best Original Score. I don't know why. And the part that I really want to emphasize, do you know offhand how many nominations this film got for Best Original Song?
Only because you ask, I'm going to say it's 0.
You, sir, are correct. This film got 0 nominations for Best Original Song. The nominees in 1937, there were only 5, were Whispers in the Dark from Artists and Models, Remember Me from Mr. Dodd Takes the Air, That Old Feeling from a film called Walter Wanger's Vogues of 1938. The one that I think should have won would have been They Can't Take That Away From Me, from Shall We Dance, written by George and Ira Gershwin. Talk about one of the classic American standards. That's one of them. But the winner was Sweet Leilani from Waikiki Wedding. It's a song that Bing Crosby sang, and it was a very big hit that year. But we will eventually talk about the very first film from Disney to win an Academy Award for song, let alone be nominated. We just mentioned When You Wish Upon a Star. Nothing from Snow White. It did get a special Oscar that year, but the music was not even, the songs were not nominated, which I genuinely am surprised by, because this film was a huge instant hit. It was beloved by audiences and critics. Again, it got that special Oscar, not by accident. Mm-hmm. It got nominated for its score, but nothing for the songs, which is pretty surprising to me. But in terms of things that are surprising, so after Hi-Ho, after the dwarves get home, they find Snow White. There are lots and lots and lots of gags about the dwarves and the pretty lady, and there's a good 10 or 15 minutes without any songs until Snow White makes them dinner and demands that they wash up, which leads to a song called Blood-a-Luddle-Um-Dum, the dwarves washing song, which is, I'm going to say it, Scott, hashtag hot take, not as good as Hi-Ho. It is.
It is a song that exists.
And listen, in the same way that we could absolutely acknowledge these songs are not meant to be show tunes a la the songs of the Disney Renaissance, the Dwarves Washing song is obviously not meant to be as meaty in a way as Hi-Ho. It's not meant to be the same kind of big musical production number. The thing that I was particularly fascinated by, again, it's the same men singing this song, but it's not really singing. It's more like Rex Harrison in My Fair Lady, that kind of spoken word with, like, if you listen to what they're saying, you realize, oh, what they're saying rhymes, but it's not really sung through, which is an odd choice because it's like, the people watching this film in 1937, it's not as if you knew, it's not like Audrey Hepburn's voice, speaking of My Fair Lady, being dubbed by Marnie Nixon. You don't think to yourself, is that the actor really singing right now? So it's a baffling choice that it's not a song that really seems like a song instead of more like a spoken word poem.
Yeah, I mean, and as we will get into with the silly song in a moment, it's a very, they basically serve the same function. It's like, it's just a little lightheartedness that you can set some slapstick to and mostly have the music do the heavy lifting. Like, I don't know why it needed to be a song with lyrics in the conventional sense. It was never going to be a hit single, and that's okay. Not all of them have to be. There's going to be some filler along with the killer, but yeah, it's good, clean fun. We're gonna make an entire, I don't know, 2-3 minute segment out of people getting wet, and it's okay.
Yes, and also I think it was around here that I wrote in my notes, they do a lot of whistling in this movie.
Yeah.
But I'd forgotten. I don't know why I'd forgotten, because again, as our listeners I'm sure will note, as either us can note, literally one of the songs has the word whistle in it, so why am I surprised? And, moving on from that, the next song is also a song that the dwarves sing primarily, and it is in some form or fashion in the new movie, and that is the Silly Song, which is best known as the dwarves' yodel song. If you haven't seen Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs recently, this is the song that takes place where Snow White dances with all the dwarves, including Dopey standing on top of another dwarf's shoulder. It's a very memorable scene. If you've ever been on the Snow White theme park attraction, you know that it, at least, I forget if it currently still is with the revised version.
It's the first scene.
Okay. I thought it was.
It's interesting to realize that so much of, it's the last basically 20 minutes of Snow White that is the ride.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
also the thing through the forest, you get the creepy things. That's also
Well, but
from an
that's
early
gone.
part.
But that's gone now.
In my version, in my head, it's still there. Who cares about the facts when you can just have your dreams?
Yes.
Anyway, so the silly song is, at least in the original version, I think it is charming. It isn't very lyrically dense, and I think it's a nice visual scene. Again, to your point earlier, the music is really charming. It's really effective. The lyrics are just, it's just another reminder of how odd the dwarves as characters are. This is the first of many times where comic relief characters get a big spotlight for a while. Once the dwarves are here, they're as vocal as Snow White is herself. And that doesn't always work, but it's one of those things where this song is at least cute to listen to and to look at. I just don't know that the lyrics really stand out. What are your thoughts on this song?
I mean, it's considering that it's not a great song. It also feels like maybe each of the dwarves, well, each of the ones who actually speak, should have gotten their own verse. It's like I understand. So the premise of the song, they each say they get to tell a little joke. Happy gets his I like to dance and tap my feet and wash it. The classic joke about I just washed and I can't do anything with them. And so it's like, oh, we're going to get a little silly joke, and then Bashful gets one, and then it's over. It's like, oh, are they all just, the rest of them just terrible at telling jokes? I mean, it feels like a setup for more along the same line, and they might have all been sort of dad jokes and groaners, but let it play out, I guess is what I'm saying. Let everyone get their moment to shine.
Yes, and it's so funny that you talk about the concept of dwarves speaking, because that may be something we revisit later in this discussion. Put a pin in that one, friends. So, I mean, the opening song, it's cute. It's basically a dance sequence in a lot of ways that, again, I think is a very good proof of concept for what the animators could do in terms of creating these characters who can dance relatively believably, but maybe not a winner of a song. As I said
But
earlier, well,
but
go
it's
ahead.
also interesting that it ends with ho hum. The tune is dumb. The words don't mean a thing. It's like the tune is great. The tune is that's not the problem here. Yeah, the words don't mean a thing, but yeah, that the tune isn't dumb. The tune is great. Let's keep going.
They're halfway to self-awareness. They're this
Yes.
close to getting it. But anyway, as I said earlier, the next song, again, close to an hour in, we get "Someday My Prince Will Come," because Snow White tells the dwarves that she has met a charming young man. Don't ask her his name. She didn't get that level of detail with him yet. But boy, he sure is a nice fellow, and she sure would love to ride off with him into the sunset one day. So she sings "Someday My Prince Will Come," which, among other things, leaving aside how late in the film, relatively speaking, this song shows up, I was also surprised that even if you include the initial set of lyrics, which are, again, more spoken through than sung through, even
Mhm.
so, this song is less than 2 minutes long. And if you count just the singing, it's less than 90 seconds long. It is a fine song. I think, again, similar to my reaction to the overall film, it feels like this is what it can sound like when a princess yearns for her true love. But this isn't going to be the pinnacle of the type of song that Disney can create. It's a good start, but it is the kind of thing where you think, well, I'm glad that wasn't Disney saying we can never top this. I'm glad they tried to improve on it, because it's a good start, but certainly not, I think, the most notable type of this song. But what are your thoughts on "Someday My Prince Will Come"?
Yeah, I mean it's I mean almost in the same way as we were just talking about the silly song. It's like, especially because they have this big build, they have the dwarfs get there, was he tall and strong? Was he handsome? They get
Mm-hmm.
this big build up to like, and you could hear the strings swelling, and we're gonna get this, and it's just done. It's just over before we get a chance to it. And that's why so much of this feels like, you know, there's all this throat clearing towards a song that and again we have to listen to this particular voice singing it, so maybe I should count my blessings that there weren't two more verses. But it's they're just, they all feel so truncated as songs with lyrics that you then have to kind of let all the music do most of the heavy lifting, which it's perfectly capable of doing.
Yes, and again, it's a cute song. It is, again. I think about a song like A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes, which again feels a lot like this, even if A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes from Cinderella is not about a prince specifically. I think arguably this song is the type of thing that Rachel Zegler was probably thinking of when she was criticizing the original film, because again, it's not Snow White taking any agency for herself. It's saying, well, someday a guy will rescue me, which is technically accurate, and it does happen here in the film, but it's not exactly the kind of thing where you think, wow, good for you taking some control for yourself. And again, there are 3 reprises that appear after this one. There's a brief reprise of Hi Ho. It's pretty much just an echo of what we've already heard. Again, call and response, echo, there's lots of that in this movie. One song shows up again. Harry Stockwell basically reminds us that the prince exists by singing a brief snippet of one song. And then we get a choral version of Someday My Prince Will Come when Snow White finally does ride off into the sunset with her prince at the very end of the movie. Now, there were a number of songs that weren't used in the film. There were a couple. There's one song that was completely animated, a song called Music in Your Soup, which just for that title alone, I wish we'd gotten to see the entire thing, because Music in Your Soup, I want to hear about that. And then the song that was replaced by the silly song called You're Never Too Old to Be Young. Okay. And it's funny, you mentioned earlier, like, songs that were or weren't meant to be a hit. It's worth noting, this movie is the first American film that had a soundtrack album released alongside the actual film. Obviously, it was released on record back in the day, and it was a much bigger hit at that time than might be the case today with the new film. But again, it was a big hit. And obviously, one of the reasons that we know it was a big hit, and is certainly true for a lot of Disney songs, is that there have been lots and lots and lots of covers of some of these songs. One thing I know that Scott and I are going to want to talk about, depending on the film, depending on the song, in not just this episode, but in future installments, is talking not only about the songs that we know from the movies, but the way that they've been covered. And I'll tell you, I did not realize until listening to a few of these covers literally today, this very morning, there are some random musical acts that have covered songs like this. And if you're listening out there and saying, I don't believe you, Josh, first of all, how dare you? Second of all, there are some that are not surprising. With a Smile in a Song was covered by Doris Day. That sounds about right. Barbra Streisand did a cover of Someday My Prince Will Come. Sure, why not? Sinead O'Connor did a cover of Someday My Prince Will Come. And this is where I hope you're not driving, because you may have just pulled over in surprise. But I think my favorite of the most inexplicable covers, Scott, and I don't know if you have a better one than what I'm about to say, would be Tom Waits covering Hi Ho.
I actually do, but it is En Vogue's version of Someday My Prince Will Come, which is so bad. It is so terrible.
Okay, I did not get a chance to hear that one. The one that came close, the one that I think was very weird considering the musical act, because let me be clear, I assume, did you listen to the Tom Waits cover of Hi Ho?
I have heard it. I haven't heard it recently.
So I had not heard it until today. And if you know Tom Waits' music, what I would say is it sounds exactly like what you would think a Tom Waits cover of Hi Ho would sound like, which means it is very weird, very gravelly, very dark and intense, but it's what you kind of expect a Tom Waits version would sound like. The one that threw me off, it wasn't even one of the ones I just named. There is a version of Whistle While You Work covered by Diana Ross and the Supremes, and it's weird. It's a weird arrangement. No, it's a weird arrangement because I think about Diana Ross and the Supremes. I think about that Berry Gordy Motown style. It's not quite the Phil Spector Wall of Sound, but you've got in my head, I have this is what the Supremes sound like. And it just felt off. I did not get a chance to listen to En Vogue cover Someday My Prince Will Come, though. What's the story there?
I wish I knew the story. I mean, whose idea this was and why it was deemed a wise decision. But I just to kind of back up to the idea of why, when we were first talking and batting around the idea of doing this podcast, and I was interested in the idea of how these work as songs, obviously within the context of the films in which they originated. But I think you can learn a lot about a song as a song when you see what other artists do with it. And certainly because of the kind of the cultural footprint of Snow White, it was going to yield more potential cover versions just because it's Snow White and these songs have, such a long history, and there are going to be more versions here than we may encounter with, say, Pete's Dragon. That's not going to have quite as many possible other things. But you mentioned that Sinead O'Connor version of Someday My Prince Will Come, which is from the 1988 Stay Awake compilation, which has several cover versions, which all of which are kind of interesting in their own way. But I think that the kind of the little bit of darkness that's in her version of it suggests something different, that it's the same song, it's the same lyrics, but there's something sort of almost creepy about the way that she interprets just sitting around and waiting for someone to rescue you from a situation. And knowing what we do now about Sinead O'Connor's background, it's, there's some stuff there to keep it G-rated for our audience. So I love the idea of thinking about how much other potential there is for these songs, even beyond the most familiar context in which we know them.
To be fair, I believe I said the phrase "look at this asshole" about an hour ago.
That's
so
okay.
I think we have gone a little farther away from the G rating.
Yeah.
To be fair, I'm not saying we need to be cursing all the time. And I will say I did listen to the Sinead O'Connor version. It's a very short one, I should note. It's about a minute long, all told. And it's funny, in my notes I had said because even leaving aside her recent passing and the story about her background, her life in the last few years. Even without that, I feel like because Sinead O'Connor had cultivated a certain aura, a certain distinctive image of who she was as an artist, hearing her sing those lyrics feels very, it's a weird blend of tragic or sarcastic in a way. So it's very interesting. I think that one definitely bore very interesting fruit because I mentioned the Barbra Streisand version, which I found, again, not unsurprising. Like, it sounds like you would expect a Barbra Streisand version would sound, and I think it was also recorded in 2001. So not young Barbra Streisand. This is in her legendary status. And as I put in my notes, way, way, way too bombastic. It is a very, it is a big, brassy version of the song. The one I really like, there is a Chet Baker version of Someday My Prince Will Come. It's about an 8-minute version, I think live, because you can hear audience applause in the middle of it. It's really quite good, I thought.
And there's one other one I'd like to suggest. Los Lobos released a 2009 album of just Disney covers. It was entirely a Disney covers album, and they had done something with one of the earlier compilations, but their version of Hi Ho, which includes Spanish language lyrics, and you talked about imagining what it would sound like. It's like, imagine what it would sound like when Los Lobos does Hi Ho. And it's cool because them doing sort of a bouncy version and sort of a norteño style is really kind of fun.
Yeah, I would agree. I did listen to that one. Yes. I was trying to forget if they were, who was it who did the version of You've Got a Friend in Me in Toy Story 3? Was it Los Lobos or a different group I'm thinking of? I forget off the top of my head.
No, I don't remember that. For some reason, I kept mixing it up in my head with the version of I've Got No Strings by the Gypsy Kings.
Gotcha. Yes. But yeah, I listened to the Hi-Ho version that they did as well. That was very, very clever. I think a fun play. And again, considering that they did that whole album of covers of Disney, we will no doubt revisit their work in other situations. I just want to point out, before we wrap the cover corner up, at least from my perspective, I don't know why it surprises me, because as Scott knows, we're both big Disney theme park fans, and I love listening to Disney music, Disney background music. So I've heard kind of jazzy versions of Disney songs that Disney itself has commissioned. Mm-hmm. I don't know why it then surprised me to realize, boy, there's a lot of jazz artists that do covers of Disney songs. There's a Louis Armstrong version of Whistle While You Work. Mm-hmm. There's that aforementioned Chet Baker version. There's Dave Brubeck. And his group did a version of Hi-Ho, and I think there's a couple other songs from this they've covered. I will say the one that we absolutely need to make sure people avoid, like the plague. I know everybody out there might be thinking, boy, I want to know what Alvin and the Chipmunks would sound like singing Whistle While You Work. My friends, the answer is no, you don't want to hear that. It's terrible. It's exactly what you would think it would sound like.
I think you could have ended that with, if you want to know what Alvin and the Chipmunks, and just ended right there, and then it's the same result.
Exactly. But again, I think that, for me at least, that wraps up Cover Corner. Were
Sure.
there any other points you wanted to share on the covers?
No, but I again, I'm looking forward to, as we progress, just thinking about
Mm,
that idea, because I think that there are some amazing songs which you realize they're so indelibly connected with it, and
mm,
especially as we get into the 90s and you compare the radio versions of some of the
mm.
animated songs with their in film versions. Well, I mean, the radio versions were in film too, just over the closing credits, but you get very different vibes.
Oh, yes. And speaking of different vibes, why don't we transition into our discussion of the Songs of Snow White 2025? This is, of course, the new film directed by Mark Webb, starring Rachel Zegler, Gal Gadot, and more. It is generally kind of sort of the same story as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And speaking of covers, there are three songs that have made the transition, kind of, into the new movie: Hi Ho, Whistle While You Work, and the Silly Song. Now, I should note, according to the production notes or something along those lines, there is an underscore of Someday My Prince Will Come in the original score of the new film.
Mhm.
I don't know about you, Scott. I did not notice it when I watched the
I
film
did not
last
pick
night.
it up. I did not pick it up.
Okay. And that's the thing, I want to reiterate to our listeners. We're recording this episode on March 19th. Each of us in our respective parts of the country saw this film at advanced screenings last night. And talking about kind of the proper context, I want to clarify that the soundtrack for the new Snow White was released by Walt Disney Records on March 14th. So if I had wanted to, or if you had wanted to, Scott, we could have listened to the soundtrack in advance of seeing the movie. It's almost, in my head, it's almost akin to like if I'm going to a concert and I say, I want to see what's on the set list before I go to see this artist or this group. I will admit I've done that before sometimes if I'm looking for, I mentioned Billy Joel earlier. I saw him in
Mhm.
concert in Phoenix about a decade ago, and I kind of wanted to know, obviously I love many of his songs, but is he going to sing Vienna? Is he going to sing, I mean, not, is he going to sing scenes from an Italian restaurant? Because, of course, he's going to sing that.
Yes.
But the point is, you might want to know what's the order. When am I going to hear? What am I going to hear in the encore? I did look at the track listing for this movie, but I did not listen to the songs in advance because I thought, the most appropriate time to experience these songs, the most normal perhaps, is watching the film. This is something where these songs are going to dominate some amount of time in this film. I want to hear these songs as they play. And can I assume you did the same thing, or did you listen to any of these songs in advance?
I had watched the YouTube version of Waiting on a Wish.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So I did not. I went in as cold as I could. The only reason why I wanted to look at the track listing, there's a couple reasons why. A, I wanted to know how many of the songs in the original film were in the new one. B, did Gal Gadot get to have a song? Because, as I mentioned earlier, the Evil Queen does not have a song in the original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which does kind of feel like a bit of a missed opportunity in hindsight. And, I've spoken at length, if not on the old show, certainly online, about being frustrated with modern Disney animation having villains who are really misunderstood. They're not really as bad as you think they are. And whatever else is true of this movie, and I should note, in general, we're not going to spend time discussing an overall film. I think in this case, and in the case of some newer films, we might inevitably approach that and discuss, broadly speaking, what we think of the film. Whatever else I think of this movie, it is true that the Evil Queen is as one-dimensionally evil here as she was in the original film. So Gal Gadot does get a song. All is fair, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. It is a villain song. So tabling that, though, let's talk first about Hi Ho, Whistle While You Work, and the Silly Song. And to do that, unfortunately, we must talk about one of the elements of this movie that has been notable since they released the production still last year, and that would be the dwarves, who I should note are not referred to as dwarves in this movie or little men, which is a very understandable thing. There have, Peter Dinklage a few years ago very notably publicly went on the record criticizing Disney for remaking a film that obviously, in spite of being fantastical and not really an accurate, realistic depiction of little people, is creating a certain perception in a person's mind about what it is like to be a little person if you are small-minded and or an idiot, and we know that there is no shortage of such people these days.
Mm-hmm.
But the point being, they are visualized here via CG. It is meant to be photorealistic CGI. I would say it is akin to, the elves at the end of the Polar Express, or the aliens in Mars Need Moms, or take your pick of hideous Robert Zemeckis movies of the last few years, I guess. And I mention that because, unfortunately, watching the film unfold with these songs, it is, first of all, it's very jarring the way that Hi Ho starts, because Hi Ho is the first of those three songs I mentioned that show up in this film. Whistle While You Work is in the movie, but unlike in the original film, the dwarves sing Whistle While You Work with Snow White because they help her clean. That's a notable difference between the way the two songs are presented. But Hi Ho is where it starts, and it is very jarring because there's a lot going on in this sequence, and it's all pretty heavily CG, which means it's pretty gross to look at, unfortunately. And more importantly, even though you have the Seven Dwarfs, I don't know if it's just a mix of the way they're visualized. They don't have the same kind of colorfully distinctive clothing. I didn't think their facial features were all pretty garish, and outside of like Grumpy and Dopey, about whom more soon, there's not really a ton to differentiate them as characters, so it just kind of felt like a, not quite the most nightmarish thing to look at in a Disney remake, but it's not pleasant to look at. And the only thing that I will give this movie credit for, as I was watching the Hi Ho sequence and the mine, which is like 40 times bigger in the new version than it is in the original, as depicted in the Hi Ho sequence, as I was watching it, I was thinking, so are they going to use the jewels to save the kingdom, or to like bring, like, to help fund the kingdom moving forward? Or is the climax going to be a battle between the evil queen and Snow White in the mine, or something ridiculous like that? And to this movie's credit, neither of those things happens. But that's all the credit I'm going to give in that situation. So, I mean, we talked about Hi Ho. Hi Ho was your big, this is the song that stuck in my head. As I mentioned, there are more lyrics in this version. It is a
Many,
much
many
more
more.
lyrically, many more. What did you think of this version of Hi Ho?
I'm going to preface this by saying that I know that from our very brief exchange last night, I'm going to be far more overall positive on this film than you are. Again, we're not talking about the film mostly, and that's partly because I am in the tank for Pasek and Paul. I do love their songs, and I love their style. I will not apologize for it. Just deal with it. But it was not their style is not the same as the style. So the additions to the existing songs didn't work because it was an attempt by someone to try to mimic and fit their bit, their lyrical style into, there's nothing intentionally cutesy or clever about the lyrics of Hi Ho as written by, Frank Churchill and Larry Morey. But so then you have these versions of the lyrics in the new film, which is, I'm sleepy. Yes, we know. And yes, and everything. That's the problem. The problem is the attempt by writers who I think have their thing to try to do their thing within another existing song. And that's the problem.
I definitely did not like the yes, we know. It's like, well, of course you do, because apparently, according to this film, all the dwarves have been alive for 275 years, which is definitely a detail I needed to have resolved. And yeah, I mean, it's like with Pasek and Paul. I mean, they wrote the songs for La La Land, which I do like La La Land a lot. I think the songs are very good in that film. My son likes Greatest Showman, so I've heard those songs more than enough. Speaking of the word enough and the songs in that film, isn't there a song like Never Enough?
Never Enough.
Like, there you go.
Yes.
I will say, I couldn't help but think of one of their other big titles, the musical Dear Evan Hansen, for a couple of reasons. One of which, okay, I have to get this off my chest, because this is not about Pasek and Paul. There is one choice this movie makes that made me so mad. That made me, and I should note, I didn't hate this movie. Nothing this movie for the most part. I think it is not as bad as it could have been. Rachel Zegler is very charming. Unsurprisingly, I loved West Side Story. I think that was the best film of 2021. I think the Spielberg version is better than the original. That may be a ballsy thing to say. I don't know, but I do love that movie. And I think that Andrew Burnap, who plays Jonathan, I like him. I don't know that his songs are great, but I think he's good in the film. There is a choice this movie makes, and it isn't really about the music, but again, I have to get it off my chest. And I don't know, Scott, if you had at least the similar experience of figuring this out before it is revealed in the film. The movie begins. I know you know what.
Are you going to do it? Are you really gonna? Are you really gonna do it?
First of all, I'm going to spoil something in this movie. That's number one. If you're oh well, again, this episode's going to come out after the film is open, and I know that there are listeners out there who are thinking, "Wait a second, Josh, how on earth could you spoil anything about this movie? I've seen the original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. You're not going to tell me that Snow White doesn't live happily ever after, are you? Of course not. That happens as you'd expect. I should note, a good chunk of this movie does line up pretty much with what happens in the original film, down to Snow White being awoken by true love's kiss. Her love interest does wake her from a coma. That happens in this movie. But the movie begins with that kind of classic storybook quality. You see the storybook open, Snow White, and a young male voice begins narrating the story. And I initially thought, oh, they're doing something like Tangled. They're going to have, it won't be her prince, it'll be the guy like Flynn Rider narrating Tangled. It'll be Snow White's love interest narrating this. And I thought, okay, odd choice, but whatever. And then a few minutes after the prologue, when we see Rachel Zegler as Snow White, she's in the castle and she sees the guy who she will eventually fall in love with, Jonathan, stealing some food. And he starts talking to her, and I thought, that's not the voice of the narrator. That's weird. And then a few minutes later, I think literally as the hi-ho sequence was starting, I thought, son of a bitch, is Dopey the narrator of this movie? And to quote the famous chaos mathematician Ian Malcolm, boy, do I hate being right all the time. Because it's not just that Dopey is the narrator of this movie. Dopey speaks in this film. I want everybody to imagine me saying that like it's Garbo speaks, like that famous poster from the 30s or 40s or whenever. Dopey speaks, because in this version, Dopey was just too scared to speak. That Snow White, with her confidence and bravery, convinced him he should speak. And it made me so mad, because Dopey doesn't speak. Dopey doesn't speak. That would be like saying, you know what, Bashful? He's confident in this movie. It would almost be the joke of the whole, like in other kind of movies where, hey, here's my friend Tiny, and it's some big hulking guy, and the name is ironic. Why? Why do you need to do that? Dopey does not need to speak. He doesn't talk. That's the point.
I know this is not the podcast for that, but I could go probably an hour arguing with you that I loved that choice. I will. We will have this conversation offline, but because this isn't what this
I know
this is about primarily. However,
yes, go ahead.
I think that there are. I mean, we could probably we could spend an entire other hour just on how we view the way that things were done differently between the two movies. I think that perhaps the real issue where it comes to the music is, would it have been a better choice either to simply do all of the original songs or only original songs?
This is a fair point.
Yeah. And I think that it's there are things that feel like, well, you have to acknowledge this reality and people are going to be expecting to hear it. Well, they might have been expecting to hear Someday My Prince Will Come, and they didn't hear that. So, right. There are choices you make creatively. And if you're going to make the creative choice that this Snow White is going to be more proactive and not passive and all of these kinds of things, so that we can't have that be the song, you just make that choice that this is a different movie. This is a different movie, and you don't have hi-ho and you don't have Whistle While You Work, and you just do your own thing. That might have been a better choice, because again, and I'm once again not going to apologize, without exception, I think the original songs are good. All of the performances are not good. Gal Gadot is so bad in this thing. It was really, not just as a singer, but she's not, I don't know. And I really did not look, I don't know anything about her history of whether she has done other things where she's sung. It's not great as a vocal performance, just singing, but the performance is bad. It is
Scott,
just bad.
Scott, I don't know what you're talking about. 5 years ago, almost to the day, she very famously sung a song with a lot of her famous friends.
Oh, God.
Literally
That
four
is
or
its own
five.
history.
Hang on, 4 or 5 hours before my screening, I saw an article from New York Magazine where it's the 5 year anniversary of her Hideous Imagine video, and I thought, oh
Right.
great, thanks for
Yeah.
reminding me about that
Yeah.
before I hear her sing a song. And so there's a lot to unpack here because this is I'm glad we're starting off with such a spirited debate because I do not like here. I don't think the new songs, we should say, it's funny, we were saying original songs. I have to remind myself the difference between the songs from the original film versus the
Right.
songs that Pasek and Paul, and I should note, Jack Feldman is credited as an additional lyricist. People out there may recognize Jack Feldman. He wrote these songs with Alan Menken to Newsies. I don't know how much he contributed. He's credited, obviously, but who knows how much that may mean. I don't know that it's that I think the songs that Pasek and Paul wrote are bad. I think they are forgettable. And I'll put it this way. You have Hi Ho in your head today. I have Whistle While You Work in my head. I don't have songs like Good Things Grow or Princess Problems or
And I have those in my head too. I mean, I'm going to say it. I think they are, and I do think that this is an indication, furthermore, of that style thing that I referred to. I am a show tunes person.
Sure.
And
so
I
am
think
I.
and I think that it was clear to me from the first time I heard a Pasek and Paul thing. I didn't need to read an interview. I know that Ashman Menken songs were part of what sort of created their thing. That
Sure.
is that they exist within that idiom, and I think they're quite good at it. I know there are, with any kind of creative person, there are those who, frankly, there are people who just hate musicals, and that's a whole other thing. But I did find, where the good things grow is something that I remembered. I do think that, and part of it is the filmmaking choices. I think that the way that Webb directs Waiting on a Wish in particular is very unusual. We're so used to these god awful people who are theoretically good at directing musicals, directing terrible musicals. I shan't name names, but we all know who we're talking about here.
Rob
and
Marshall?
That he
I'll name names. Rob Marshall? That's what we're talking about. Right?
Yes, we are talking about Rob Marshall.
I
We're not talking
understand.
exclusively. We're not talking exclusively
True.
about Rob
Yes.
Marshall, but we are talking. But he actually directs that scene so that we are focused on Rachel Zegler's face while she is singing this song. Not cutaways to other things, just allowing a performance to be. And that, to me, actually is part of when you think about how does this song work, is I'm paying attention to the song because the director is giving me the opportunity to do so. In this case, not always he, obviously, but he is deciding this song matters. What is going on. And so I paid attention, and it did matter, and it's a good song. So we'll go, I guess, maybe we'll go one by one. I guess sure. We can, but
well,
I think
we can. I want to broadly speak to a couple points you made, because I agree and I disagree. One thing I do agree with that you just said that it didn't really stick out for me until the one new song that I genuinely, unironically enjoyed, which was A Hand Meets a Hand, which is the big love duet that Snow White and Jonathan have for each other. I was watching it and thinking, Mark Webb is actually letting these play out without like 40 cuts to a second. It's a low bar to clear. I think where I will point out is that's a
that's fair.
Low bar.
That's quite fair.
But full credit to Mark Webb. He clears that bar consistently. I think where you and I differ is I completely agree that by doing that, he allows you to focus on the songs. For me, it's like, well, I almost don't want to focus on the songs. I also agree that Pasek and Paul clearly take inspiration from Ashman and Menken, and there are a few people of the modern era who are more worth taking inspiration from. I wish that the songs here, because that's the other thing. The Greatest Showman in La La Land, and even Trolls, because they wrote a song in Trolls, a song that I don't really like. But the difference is right now, I could hum part of that song from Trolls. I could hum This Is Me or Never Enough from The Greatest Showman. I do not think a lot of the songs here have that same earwormy quality. And I would also say, in at least one song, I'm not going to defend Gal Gadot much for All Is Fair because listen, she is trying to go big. She is swinging for the fences with her performance overall, and she is missing big time, swing and a miss.
Oh yeah.
I don't entirely think that it is on her that All Is Fair doesn't work. It doesn't work, but I don't think it's just her. But before we get into that, let's start with the big song, kind of the early song that gets us started with it, which is Good Things Grow. Interestingly enough, not a song that Rachel Zegler sings at the outset. The prologue of the movie, which Dopey narrates, because why wouldn't you cast a musical performer like Andrew Barth Feldman and then not have him sing? Especially since he played Evan Hansen, if I recall correctly, in a version of Dear Evan Hansen, which, again, is a choice. I think, by the way, another fascinating choice I didn't realize until I was looking at the end credits. Did you see who played Bashful in this movie?
I actually didn't look at any of the other dwarf credits. No.
Titus Burgess from Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, and who played Sebastian in a Broadway version of The Little Mermaid. And it's like, and you have him play Bashful. If you know Titus Burgess, you know he is being cast against type to play somebody who is bashful. Anyway, Good Things Grow starts us off. The prologue that Dopey narrates explains that Snow White, first of all, Snow White was born in the middle of a snowstorm. That's why she's called Snow White. She can't be called Snow White anymore because of the color of her skin, because, of course, Rachel Zegler is not white, which is one of those details that felt more than a little unnecessary to explain. For example, another one that I'll just call out. I love that why Snow White has a short haircut is now a plot point in this movie.
It is canonically short.
And forcibly short. She can't just do it by herself. Anyway, we learn in this prologue that Snow White's parents were this kind and loving king and queen. Everybody in the kingdom is happy. They sing this song, Good Things Grow, that is meant to just show you the unity in this kingdom and encouraging Snow White not just to be fearless, fair, brave, and true, but that she should nurture good things in life and obviously, be open to positive experiences and be kind and giving to other people. And again, I should note that with not really any notable exceptions, I don't think any of the new songs are automatically actively bad outside of All Is Fair, probably. Good Things Grow is okay. I think for me, again, it's like I literally don't just say this is a bit. I couldn't hum a single bar of it for you right now if I had to. If my life depended on it. If Mickey Mouse was here threatening me with a gun, because why wouldn't Mickey Mouse do that? I would be dead on the floor.
Well, he could do that now in one of the
one of the horror movies.
Yes. One of the horror movies. One of the many Screamboat. I'm sorry, you're forgetting Screamboat.
I am forgetting that. I didn't even hear about that one.
Really? Oh.
I'm too busy thinking about how John Oliver has Steamboat Willie as a recurring character on Last Week Tonight last year. The public domain thing. But anyway, Simi,
yes.
Tell me about Good Things Grow. Because you're telling me you're humming that one. So what am I missing?
It's not. I mean, it's not about missing, and I do think that there are just stylistic things that resonate, and I've always liked the way that there is a musical style that their songs tend to have. That is just something that has the bounce to it that I'm often looking for. And I think, I was concerned about the presentation because I think that this opening sequence feels a lot like the way that the Belle song is presented in the live action version of Beauty and the Beast. That this sort of town square of everybody dancing around and being very happy. And it's it felt like that was nothing. It didn't have any kind of unique filmmaking quality to it. But again, I was just bopping along because I do like the way the song. I do like the song, and I think that this is again because I think about Pasek and Paul in the way that they are following in the footsteps, successfully or not, you can argue, of Ashman and Menken, that they are trying to do these same kinds of things. This is their Belle. Then, Waiting on a Wish is it's their I Want song. And then they have their villain song, and they have their love song, and their showstop. All of these things are the same kinds of songs you will find in the 90s, or 80s Disney animated features,
Mm-hmm.
and they just work, perhaps largely because they evoke those things.
Mm.
Whether that is a larger part than they deserve on their own, I couldn't say, but they just work for me.
I I want to revisit in a few minutes. You mentioned that there is a showstopper song in this movie, and I'm very curious to find out which song you think qualifies for that.
Well,
Because
I mean,
I don't think there's a single one that does that. I also don't
I
think they're trying to be fair.
that's I mean, I guess you're probably right in the sense that they're really using the 1937 songs as their showstoppers in this thing, because that's I mean, yeah, Princess Problems is more along the lines of the Les Poissons of this. It's just the let's stop and be silly for a while song.
See, it's funny. First of all, it's so fascinating how sometimes you and I have very similar thoughts, but then go in different directions. Because I also, during Good Things Grow, was thinking, so this is like Belle. And I was not thinking of the 2017 film directed by Bill Condon, because I have attempted, much like the show Severance, where they sever your inner and outer parts, I have tried to sever my memories of the remakes of these films. But I was definitely thinking about Belle, but I was also thinking about it in a unflattering way of like, well, this isn't quite as good as that, is it? Again, it's okay, but it's the kind of thing where the what it's trying to communicate didn't feel as creatively daring in a way. When you think about what Bell is doing in that initial version in 1991's
Mm-hmm.
animated film, and it's not fair automatically to say, why aren't you doing that with this song? Because this song is not trying to communicate so much plots, so much character in its opening scene. But inevitably I did think about that during the sequence, and certainly All Is Fair fits that villain song, waving through a window. Sorry, waiting on a wish. I can't help that. By the way, I'll tell you, I want to clarify. I do love show tunes. I am a big musical person. I am sure that you and I would strongly disagree on Dear Evan Hansen, the story of a sociopath who does not learn his lesson.
I will say it's still a great bunch of songs. It's a really problematic text.
I mean, especially after the movie, which, woo boy, that movie, real rough. Anyway, I will say, Waiting on a Wish. Now, my glibness aside, Rachel Zegler is fine casting. I remember when they announced that she was going to play Snow White, I thought, yeah, I can't think of anybody better to play her, considering her background, considering her age. Waiting on a Wish to me felt like a song that I kept waiting to break out into that final, like, you think about some of the classic I Want songs that kind of jump into a higher key or a higher register for the last verse and chorus. I kept waiting for that here, fittingly enough, perhaps, and it doesn't get there. And I don't know. It was, again, okay. It was Rachel Zegler's, very talented. I give full credit to how the music production goes for her songs and for Jonathan Burnap, because even though they are undoubtedly recording those in the studio separate of actually filming those scenes, their performances felt pretty fluid, pretty natural. I wish I liked the song more in that case, but it was okay. I do want to, when we get to Princess Problems, I want to revisit it reminded you of Les Poissons, because it reminded me of a different song, and not from The Little Mermaid. But Waiting on a Wish, it's okay. I think that it speaks also to one of the broader choices this movie is making. I don't know how accidental or not its political subtext is. It's also not terribly subtle, I don't think. For example, the king is sent by the evil queen to fight in a far-off southern kingdom. And I thought, okay, all right, sure. And he vanishes. We learn later that the evil queen has had him killed because she wants to control the kingdom. Everybody is very sad. It's basically, the kingdom basically turns into Pride Rock after Scar has taken over for Mufasa. And after Waiting on a Wish is when Snow White goes into the forest. The huntsman shows mercy on her. That's basically right after Waiting on a Wish is where the movie follows the story we all know for the next 40 minutes of the runtime, including Hi Ho, including Whistle While You Work. Anything else you'd want to say on Waiting on a Wish before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you raise a very valid point about, and this is, I think, a characteristic of Pasek and Paul's things, that they don't generally, and there are exceptions, they're not the ones to write the let it go. They don't do that big belt, for the finale, that key change, as you say, that's not usually their style. I mean, I think I mean, I'm trying to think of really the closest equivalent in and maybe it's partly because of the singers that they've written for, because I don't
Mm.
think you're not necessarily going to, write that for Emma Stone. I just, you're not.
Yes.
So I mean, for Zendaya, sure. But not necessarily. So that could be part of it, and maybe they've just gotten into a groove of that. So I think you're right. There is a place this song could have gone. It just didn't bug me.
Mm.
I think that it's fair to say that that's, it may be reasonable to want or expect that from this kind of song now, because it's become a little bit more common, especially in some of these Disney I Want songs, that you get that sort of big showstopper of a moment from the vocalist.
Hmm.
Again, it didn't bother me. It was just okay. That was just a choice.
See, and I think it's interesting that you point that out, because bring it back to, they clearly are inspired by Ashton Menken. You think, I mean, part of your world. That's a pretty big I Want song, and that has that kind of, if not an actual
Mm-hmm.
key change, it feels like it's going for the big swing at the end, and it's interesting that they choose not to do that. Now, again, I think we spoke enough about the new version of Hi Ho and how it's not great, Bob. The next song after that is the aforementioned All Is Fair, which is
Mm-hmm.
sung by the evil queen primarily to the huntsman after she learns that she has been duped. I will tell you, one of the ways in which this film is toothless, by the way, it leads right into the song. As people know, if you've seen the original Snow White, she tells the huntsman, kill her, carve her heart out, put it in this box. The huntsman, of course, gives mercy to Snow White. And as I recall in the animated film, the huntsman puts a pig's heart into the chest, and she doesn't realize it until too late.
Mm-hmm.
In this one, the huntsman puts an apple in the chest, and it's like, did you not check his work before that? That's a bit of a poor choice on your part. But then she sings to him. He is trying to tell her, if you have any mercy, show it to Snow White. She then sings All Is Fair, and by the end of the song, Scott, I think what I would say is, I was thinking, well, the costumes by Sandy Powell look very nice. She sure looks pretty in that gown, and she does. I think the costumes are like, she is. It is a fine depiction of the evil queen if it was like an Annie Leibovitz photo, or something like that. As I said though, Gal Gadot is doing a bad job of singing. It is unlike with Zegler and Burnap. It sounds heavily auto-tuned, and even if it's not heavily auto-tuned, it's just not very tuneful. It's not enjoyable to listen to. But I think part of that is, I don't know, the lyrics. I was thinking to myself throughout the song, it's like, I wish this song was like a half step slower. I wish the tempo was
Hmm.
just a little slower, so I could actually hear the lyrics or understand what she's saying. And I think part of it, we can say, it's the fact that Gal Gadot is Israeli and she has a notable accent, even in a film like Wonder Woman. But part of it is she's being asked to go through this. It's not quite like a Lin Manuel Miranda style rap, but it feels faster than it should be.
And I completely agree there. I think that the performance is not good, and perhaps is a wrong choice for the singer who is going to be singing it.
Yeah.
But I heard every lyric. And again, we've talked about how much of the political subtext, and we know how long these things are in production.
Yes.
We're not going to suggest that this is somehow a direct response to our current moment, but it is a movie about basically thwarting an autocrat
Mm.
despot. And the lyrics in this, I think, were, and a lot of this is, I do like Pasek and Paul lyrically, and I think that this is a great. Some of the lyrics in this is, all is fair when you wear the crown, a little perk that your power provides. If they dare speak up, swat them down. She with the diamonds decides, and it's just I get to do what I want because I'm in control thing. And
Mm-hmm.
again, maybe certain things are resonating with me a bit more strongly at this moment.
Sure. I think the only argument I will make against it, because you're obviously right about the lyrics being very straightforward, is almost that they're a little too unsubtle, I think. And again, I'm not saying I'm surprised that a Disney movie would have unsubtle political subtext, if it has political subtext at all. I wasn't expecting some really sly, snuck in version of this. But I think I was almost like halfway through, because I was trying to keep up with each lyric, and I was like, I get it. I get it. I understand why she's this evil. I understand that that's the approach. And part of me definitely wondered if you have a different actress in this role, if you have, I'm trying to think of who would have been an appropriate. It's funny, I would say Amy Adams, but again, she's played Giselle, and they probably wouldn't want to cast her in another princess movie so strongly against type. But I was thinking, who else could have made this song a little bit more palatable? Because I just I want to give Gal Gadot any credit because she's bad in the film, but I don't know how much of it's entirely on her. But that said, all is
Mm.
fair is unfair, unfortunately. What do you think of the "Whistle While You Work" version, where the dwarves are singing it with Snow White? Because I think that was a good case of Rachel Zegler doing yeoman's work, where you and I both know those actors are not, like Titus Burgess is not on the set with her in the
Mhm.
same way that she would have to interact with him or any of the other actors who play the dwarves. She is doing as well as you would hope or expect a person who is essentially acting on a green screen is doing. I to your point earlier about hi ho, it's like, I don't need to have a dwarf say something like "the sun don't shine," like implying you're going to shove something up a dwarf's ass
Mm.
in the middle of that song, and that's where the stylistic, like the the styles kind of butting up against each other, felt very notable to me.
Yes, 100%. And even though I think that the sequence itself is, I enjoyed it. It's fine, and it works just as well for me to have the dwarves doing the cleaning up with the rather than having it just all be animals. It's that clash. It's that clash of
Mm.
the the new style. It's someone trying to put you know the 20th century modern on top. It's architecture that is, buildings next to each other. You're like, really? Are those two right? It's they just don't fit.
Yes, it's the Avengers campus looking like a strip mall next to Hollywoodland in
Mm-hmm,
Disney California
mm-hmm,
Adventure.
mm-hmm.
Speaking of Disney theme parks, but so again, it didn't bother me, I guess, the way that some of the songs and other remakes did, but it definitely felt very at war with itself. Now, the next song after that, after uh, a good chunk of the movie unfolds, we get to a point where Snow White leaves the dwarves because she does not want to endanger them, and she finds her way to Jonathan and his troop of theater bandits. It was very funny. I'm in a film critic chat group where yesterday, the day before we are recording this, a couple of critics had seen this before I had, and one of them said, "I thought it was better than I was expecting it to be." And somebody else said, "Oh, I thought it was pretty bad, except for Rachel Zegler." And the first person said, "I liked Jonathan and his troop of theater bandits." And I saw that phrase and I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. And then I watched the movie and I thought, oh, okay, yep, I fully get that now. The song that they then sing, that Jonathan and Snow White sing, is the aforementioned Princess Problems, which, it's funny, you thought of Le Poisson. I thought of a song from Frozen called Fixer Upper.
Fixer upper.
Uh
Now
huh.
and I think the pace. I mean, it's you can really just sort of
Very similar. Yep.
match the cadence
Uh
almost
huh.
beat for beat.
Uh huh. And if people may remember from the old show, Fixer Upper is the one song from Frozen where if only I had the choice to throw it right in the trash, I would. Now, again, Andrew Burnap is, I think, relatively charming. I will say a buddy of mine who saw this movie in Berlin a couple days ago asked me, "What did you think of Walmart Flynn Rider?" And I said, I think the actor was fine. I definitely think the character is a little, I don't know. It feels a little half-hearted, but I thought that his performance was fine. He has a decent chemistry with Rachel Zegler.
Mhm.
He has a fine voice. I was glad that A Hand Meets a Hand came after, because if Princess Problems was his only song, I would have thought, I get that you cast this guy because Jonathan Groff is too old now, but please tell me he has something else to do
Yeah.
here, because that song I think is pretty weak.
I mean,
But
it is for me the weakest of all of them, just as a song, not again the performance. I think that we've already established what we think is the
right,
weakest performance, and it's really just a chance for Tim to get kind of snarky about the fact that he thinks that all of her problems are just princess problems, but it's still
right.
you said repeatedly nothing is in your head. I still have it now. It is entirely possible that the beat for this is in my head because it sounds so much like Fixer Upper. So that's
Mm-hmm.
I
Yep.
will cop to that, but it's still something that I was like, that's fun. That's a perfectly fun little tune.
Well, and I think it's also a case of that song specifically sounds a lot more modern to me
Mm,
than even the other Pasek Paul songs in
mm,
this film, where it and again, Frozen is not meant to be set in the real in like 21st century, but there is a consistent sense across that film's songs of a bit more modern quality. This one I think is a little bit more surprising. After that, we get a very brief rendition of the Silly Song featuring the Dwarves as well as some of Jonathan's Theater Bandits. I
mm.
will tell you, the only thought I really had during this song and any of the sequences with the Theater Bandits was, you know, I get the very understandable controversy about the depiction of little people in a film like this or in a film like the original Snow White. So I get on one hand why you say we're not going to have live actors playing the dwarves because we worry that may be offensive. Why then do you cast an actual little person as one of the bandits? And he's fine, but I was thinking, why don't you? Why are the dwarves not real people? And why are they
It,
CG creations?
I I don't do this often because it seems like the it felt as though someone might have been thinking it would be too weird not to.
Mm.
That, and especially given the, well, are we taking and one of the actors playing the dwarves,
Yes,
providing the motion capture performance is also a little person. So
yes, that's
Martin
true.
Kleba.
Uh huh.
So there's but yeah, it did feel it was hard not to go, huh?
Yes.
Eh?
And considering that this version of the silly song is only about a minute long, it is partially performed not by the dwarves. That's why my mind was wandering.
Mm-hmm.
I will, by the way, just say Martin Kleba voices Grumpy. People made, I think the role people know him best from. He's in Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. He's probably the only dwarf I thought was like he is good. I think partly because Grumpy obviously is a more notable, pronounced character. I thought he did a pretty solid job in his time on screen. And
Well,
speaking of time,
you
go
did
ahead.
mention how and another thing I will completely agree with is it took me a good 10 to 15 minutes, if not longer, to be able to go, okay, which one is that? That was
Yeah,
the character design was not well thought out.
no, I would agree with that. Of course. Anyway, so after that, we get the song I mentioned earlier, "A Hand Meets a Hand," which is again, I think, it is a solid. I can't hum it right now, but it's a solid love duet between Snow White and Jonathan. It is a sweet song that takes place right after the silly song. That's kind of them in their own little world, realizing that they have this connection with each other. And again, that feels a little more classically old fashioned. It almost, honestly, speaking of West Side Story earlier, reminds me of a similar song from that
Mm-hmm.
film, One Hand, One Heart, from that show, rather.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was good. And again, as I said just a few minutes ago, I was glad that Andrew Burnett, who, by the way, I should note, I had not, he's been in a couple of films and TV shows like Under the Banner of Heaven, which I have not seen. I understand that the internet tells me he won a Tony Award within the last couple of years, but this is my first introduction to him. He was fine. I think he acquits himself well in this song. The two of them are solid together, but this was the one time where it was like, I know that we're getting close to the end of the story, so I almost wish this song had come earlier so I could have had that buoying me earlier in terms of the quality of the songs.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm a broken record in the sense that you think that all of these songs are records that should be broken, but
I wouldn't go that far. I would say I need to listen to them more times to even remember what the records sound like, which
like,
isn't great.
but I mean, they're just, I found myself consistently going, I'm enjoying this experience of listening to this song. There was not a time when I was just, doing the equivalent of looking at the watch as though people actually wear those things anymore. But it's just there. I think that they did, and again, because they are songs that are serving narrative functions in a way that the later Disney films really devoted the
Mm,
space of their songs, and that's something that really wasn't true of the 1937 version. They did that. They served their narrative function, and they were songs that I enjoyed listening to.
gotcha. Now, I do have to be the well, actually guy for you. Well, actually, I was wearing my Rocketeer watch, which I'm wearing right now, to the movie last night, and I looked at my watch a lot in the third act because the one thing that is most notably different about this movie, aside from Dopey narrates and the prince isn't the prince, is that the end of the animated movie meaning the prince kissing Snow White and happily ever after, that happens with like 20 minutes left. Because when Snow White is revived, there's still the whole matter of getting the evil queen out of the picture that has to happen. There are a couple of reprises after A Hand Meets a Hand. There's a reprise of All Is Fair, Waiting on a Wish, Good Things Grow, which serves as really the finale. None of them really stood out to me, obviously, because the original song stood out to me in a positive way. Anything that you would say about those reprises that felt unique or distinctive, or was it just, it's nice to hear these again, but also we can move on?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. So,
and we can move on.
And with that, we really can move on, unless you have any kind of closing thoughts to the wrap up here, because that's really it for the songs of all things Snow White.
I mean, I think that when we have this kind, perhaps because I knew that we were going to be coming at this, that the new movie from different directions, that I might be even more inclined to sort of dig in my heels and go, I mean, I think overall I am a mild positive on the movie, and I'm more than a mild positive on the music. And I think that perhaps because we were just talking about the other one, does it seem like I think this is a movie that stands alongside a classic film? No, absolutely not. I think that it's, we need to kind of put on the brakes just a little bit, because but I would say, if you said, do you want to listen to the music from the 1937, from start to finish, here's your two soundtracks, which one do you want to listen to? I want to listen to the new one.
Wow. Hot take from Scott, coming in right at the end here. I would choose the original if I had to choose one, because Hi Ho and Whistle While You Work are catchy, and they're frankly better than the original, I think.
And you just at the beginning of this thing said you would forward through every Adriana Castellati song, and so I don't know.
I would groan through it. I wouldn't skip it.
Okay.
Because again, when I was a kid, it wasn't I wouldn't listen to it. It was I would hear my mom like roll around, like mock it or scoff at it. That's always associated with it. And that's the thing. I want to be very clear right at the end, because why not do it now? I do not want anybody listening to this to think that I specifically, and because you liked this new movie more than I did, that I'm the type who's like, no, the original Snow White is a pure and perfect thing. How dare you touch it? I remember when Rachel, I was saying this to somebody last night before the movie started, when Rachel Zegler made the comments about the original film having questionable depictions of women, I was thinking, yeah, you're right. My immediate response wasn't, how dare you? It was, you're right. Why are you making this movie again? Because it sure sounds like you realize there are issues with it. I think if it wasn't for the thing with Dopey narrating, I don't know that I would have had any of that like active anger at it. I think I would have mostly just like nothinged this film for the most part. That one part bothered me most. The rest of it, it's like, yeah, I was there, and I'll forget it in a couple of days, unfortunately. But that's it for Snow White for now. So I think, Scott, you can take us out.
Well, it's time to close the doors of Mousterpiece Melodies. What's playing next time? Pete's Dragon. And while you wait for that next episode, I hope that you sort of bookmark us and you can continue to access our shows at our Podbean site. And also, I would say subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, again, wherever you're getting your podcasts. You should be able to subscribe and listen to future episodes. That's the hope. Of course, we want you to listen along with us. Tell us what you think. Have you seen the new Snow White? Did you love the songs? Do you think it is never enough? This Is You. Other songs that are not in this film that those guys wrote. No, but do you love the songs of the original? Thinking about the last piece we just mentioned here. If you had to listen to one of these soundtracks, gun to your head, which one would it be? Why would there be a gun to your head if you had to think about that question? Do you love them? Do you hate them? If you have any comments or questions you'd like to share, you can reach me at mousterpiececinema@gmail.com. Follow me on Blue Sky at Mousterpiece. Scott, where can our listeners find you online? You can once again find me on Blue Sky at Scott Renshaw. You can find me on Letterboxd at Scott Renshaw, and cityweekly.net for current film reviews. And I'm Scott Renshaw. And I'm Josh Spiegel, and we'll see you all next time on Mousterpiece Melodies.